going to dance. We're going to dance. We're going to dance and have some fun.
Dig.
Michael Mickey Zaffarano, also known as Mickey Z, was said to have been born in 1923, although other sources say his year of birth was 1913 or 1921. Mickey Z was originally raised in Lower Manhattan and would later reside in Brooklyn. But as he better established himself in the New York underworld, Mickey would move with his wife Rosalie and their young son out to Wantagh, Long Island. At almost 6 feet tall and stocky, he started out as a rough street hood who quickly affiliated with the Bonanno family's Little Italy crew. It was thought that Zaffarano had caught the eye of a top Bonanno capo named Carmine Galante. Zaffarano's criminal arrest record began in 1947 and included arrests for assault, robbery, kidnapping, transporting stolen securities, criminal contempt, violation of obscenity laws, and possession of pornographic film. In time, Mickey would become an official soldier within the Brigada. By the late 1960s, local and federal law enforcement authorities said that Zaffarano had indeed risen to a captain in the family. In this capacity, he was said to be in control of a vast pornography racket empire for the Bonannos, and had such power that he actually arbitrated underworld disputes related to the smut trade between competing brigadas from coast to coast. As a young guy, he originally hung around with other Mulberry Street toughs, such as future family capo Mike Sabella and a young soldier in the Lucchese family named Vincent Potenza, who was better known by his street nickname of Jimmy Jones. Zaffarano had started out as a thief, burglar, all-around hood and strong-arm man for the underworld. He was a very active hoodlum. Early on, he listed himself as the operator of a sportswear company. By the 1960s, he also owned and ran a Brooklyn restaurant as a front. As a fledgling young hoodlum in 1958, he was arrested in a highly publicized case, along with 6 other mob suspects, for operating a huge burglary and stolen goods ring in Brooklyn. During the raid, Brooklyn detectives recovered about $100,000 worth of stolen merchandise, as well as a load of worthless, out-of-circulation German currency. The loot recovered included cases of cigarettes, tape recorders, gold watches and chains, men's and women's sweaters and coats, and a wide variety of other items. The haul was so large that it took over 15 squad cars plus 3 paddy wagons to truck the loot back to police headquarters. Detectives said the ring specialized in high-end safe-cracking burglaries and truck hijacking. They found full sets of burglar tools during their arrests. One of the suspects was a beautiful 20-year-old brunette named Betty Font of Manhattan, who was a former hat check girl in a New York nightclub. She was charged with possessing stolen goods. Others nabbed with Zaffarano included Bonanno soldier Pasquale Patsy Barranca and mob associates Attilio Chiodine and Anthony Mascalo. One of the key suspects was Vincent Jimmy DiPietro, originally of Mulberry Street, but then living down in Miami Beach, Florida. Jimmy DiPietro had the well-earned reputation as a master thief, jewel burglar, and all-around top heist man. His reputation within the New York underworld was near legendary. Then the following year, in 1959, Zaffarano was charged along with Potenza and 2 more hoods named Anthony Bonacci and Gerald Perazzo for their daring daylight armed robbery and burglary of an American Express office at Idlewild Airport, better known today as JFK International. The daring gang heisted $93,000 in blank American Express money orders, traveler's checks, cash, and foreign currency. Mickey and Jimmy both hightailed out to California in order to dispose of the stolen securities, as well as try and duck authorities who had splashed news of the heist all over the newspapers. Bonacci, meanwhile, hid out in upstate New York. A federal crime, Zaffarano and Potenza were eventually tracked down in San Francisco and nabbed by the FBI. Bonacci and Perazzo were nabbed as well. At the time of Zaffarano's arrest, he had $3,000 of the stolen money orders in his possession. Charged with transporting stolen securities in interstate commerce, besides the armed robbery charges, they were also charged with a kidnapping count because during the robbery, they had actually detained and held the manager on duty at the time against his will for hours, while they threatened him to release the combination to the company's safe. Zaffarano and Potenza both went away and did a 10-year bit in Atlanta Federal Penitentiary for that little foray. Upon his release from prison, Mickey Z eventually got his finger pinched and became a made guy under Joe Bonanno. In fact, for a time, it was said that he served as the loyal driver and bodyguard for his boss, Joe Bananas. A few years later, in 1968, he was thrown back in jail for a while after being nabbed on a parole violation charge. Previous to all that, one night back on October 21, 1964, family leader Joseph Bonanno claimed to have been kidnapped by two masked gunmen who accosted him on a Midtown Manhattan street at Park Avenue. This was on the eve of a scheduled federal grand jury appearance investigating mob rackets by Joseph Bonanno the following day. In 1966, Mickey Zaffarano was brought from Atlanta Penitentiary, where he was still serving his prison term, to testify before the grand jury after he was subpoenaed and questioned about his knowledge of this alleged incident. It was highly suspected in some circles that he indeed had been one of those two kidnappers that evening. As a side note, this appearance would only be one of many grand jury subpoenas Zaffarano would receive during his underworld career. He ended up serving several 30-day contempt of court sentences during the 1960s to 1970s period because of it. Mickey had been questioned about his knowledge and involvement in several gangland murders of mob figures in the early 1970s, such as that of Carlo Lombardi in 1972. He received a jail term of 30 days for contempt after clamming up. He was also once subpoenaed before a Los Angeles grand jury probing the mob murder of Jake Molinas, a disgraced former Columbia University basketball star who was killed after involving himself in gambling and pornography rackets in partnership with Mickey and other hoodlums. Zaffarano had allegedly once ordered Molinas to a sit-down to settle porno conflicts out in California, where Zaffarano was said to hold sway. It was later strongly suspected that Joe Bonanno had staged his own kidnapping in order to disappear. This enabled him to duck several pesky grand juries probing his crime family, as well as avoid other fellow commission bosses requesting his appearance to explain several murder conspiracies against them he was accused of. In any event, Zaffarano figured into this probe. This was during a tumultuous period for their mob family that would culminate with the Banana War that raged from 1967 through 1969. Among the closer of Zaffarano's mob associates were Carmine Galante, also known as Lilo or the Cigar, a rough-and-tumble capo who in the late 1950s to early 1960s rose to serve as Bonanno underboss and eventually as acting boss until his 1979 assassination. Mickey and Lilo were known to be very close. Michael Mimi Sabella, a very low-key and capable capo based in Little Italy. Sabella later opened a popular Italian restaurant he named Casa Bella, which in Italian means Here Sabella. Girolamo Jerry Asaro and his son Vincent Asaro, both of whom were longtime members of the family based out on Long Island. The Asaro family were also related by blood to Zaffarano. Florio Flo Isabella, a longtime soldier of their Fourth Ward regime and a well-known convicted narcotics peddler and hoodlum. Anthony Mirra, a notorious vicious hoodlum and convicted heroin peddler who stood trial in 1958 with Galante, Vito Genovese, and a dozen others for controlling a huge international narcotics network operating from France to America. Salvatore Sally Burns Granello, a top Genovese soldier from Mott Street who Zaffarano knew since their youth. Mickey Sally Burns and the formerly mentioned Jimmy DiPietro were the best of friends. The outspoken and boisterous Granello would later be murdered. Matthew Matty the Horse Ianniello, another important Genovese member who also became a top kingpin in the sex trade and porno rackets of Midtown. The two mafiosi would sometimes partner on porno-related racket operations. Other friendly competitors operating within the Times Square porno rackets included the Gambino family's Robert D.B. DiBernardo and the Lucchese family's Joseph Joe Brocchini. Zaffarano would eventually become not only one of the pornography kingpins of the Times Square flesh industry, but of the entire nation as well. His underworld tentacles stretched from New York City to Florida and out to Los Angeles, California, where much of the early filming of porno loops and full-length flicks were filmed and produced. He was described in both federal and local New York City police intelligence files as the national czar and behind-the-scenes leader in the financing, production, and distribution of explicit sex films and pornography. What at first puzzled investigators was Zaffarano seemingly allowing his surname to be openly and directly connected to the smut trade. No other major mafia figure had ever openly owned or operated porno businesses before Mickey Zaffarano put his name to incorporation papers. But in his own defense, Zaffarano would only ever admit to being the owner of the various real estate and buildings housing these type businesses, and the landlord collecting rents of sex-oriented establishments at those addresses. He was not a partner of record in the businesses themselves. In the 42nd Street Times Square district, Mickey Z's growing wealth had allowed him to actually purchase entire buildings in the valuable Midtown Manhattan section, including a string of buildings from 1603 to 1607 Broadway off 42nd Street, and another at 207 West 48th Street off Broadway, both smack dab in Midtown. Zaffarano also owned the building and property at 1601 Broadway, which was the location that housed the notorious Mardi Gras Topless Bar. The Topless Bar business was actually owned and operated by Matty Ianniello. As a landlord, Zaffarano leased the location to Ianniello, but was not his partner. Collectively, these buildings housed a half-dozen sex-related businesses and were the heart of his flesh empire, as well as his main offices and headquarters. Flashy, two-story-high illuminated signs advertised peep shows, live flesh, full nude, and simulated sex shows, retail outlets for smut books and glossy fuck magazines, sex toys, and paraphernalia, and various raw photos and sex-related stores with smut reels offering both heterosexual and homosexual sex. The first floor of one entire building located at 49th Street and Broadway even housed the Pussycat Theater, a notorious full-size movie theater offering round-the-clock hardcore sex films on the big screen. The related Pussycat Show Center next door housed a huge book and peep show coin machine operation. Another of his buildings housed the notorious Broadway Arms, a private club that catered to homosexuals. It was said that this particular establishment was open 24 hours a day, offering gay films and a den for socializing, where it was said that on-premises gay sex would take place. Zaffarano's building at 207 West 48th Street housed the Cat's Eye, which was a topless and bottomless disco juice bar that featured erotic dancers. On the top floor of this same two-story building, Zaffarano's minions ran the Leave It to Beaver Lounge, which was an illegal massage parlor or whorehouse. It was said that he had something for everybody. He was also in control of a lesbian-themed bar in the same section of town. These were virtual emporiums of smut. Collectively, Zaffarano had created the sexual equivalent of the Walt Disney World of pornography. Zaffarano's operations were among the most prominent of the entire nationwide underground sex industry. As if this was not already more than enough, behind the scenes, if one had the proper introductions and knew the right people, these outlets were also said to offer films and magazines dedicated to even darker proclivities, such as extreme bestiality, violent sadomasochism, scat sex, and any other sexually degenerate type tendencies that a person could imagine. The sex industry, in all its forms, was an extremely profitable racket to begin with, but this part of the smut business was an exceptionally lucrative trade because people drawn to those darker indulgences were typically willing to pay whatever price they had to in order to satisfy their deviant sexual needs and cravings. Within a little more than 1 decade, Mickey Zaffarano created nothing less than a mafia racket dynasty, an interlocking medley of multi-million-dollar businesses that rode the gray area of both legality and morality. His operations ran coast to coast from the Big Apple to Los Angeles. He held hidden ownership interests in various smut bookstores, dirty movie houses, and other sex-related businesses in a string of cities such as the D.C. Playhouse in Washington, D.C. Federal officials stated that either through his initial monetary investments or through extortions and shakedowns by the mobsters of independent porno dealers, both Zaffarano and his Bonanno family, as well as Cosa Nostra figures and other families, control the sex industry across America. In September of 1973, after a 10-month investigation, the New York City Police Brooklyn Strike Force, headed by Dennis Dillon, the U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District, and the FBI, staged a midnight raid against a huge pornographic film processing lab Zaffarano was said to operate in Queens, with the FBI seizing over $500,000 in expensive equipment, which included machinery master reels, high-speed film processing devices, and duplicating machines. The film manufacturing plant was located in a warehouse in the Springfield Gardens section. Authorities reported that this was a very large operation said to gross in excess of $12.5 million a year. Several days later, they staged a second raid with a search warrant on the basement office of a private home located in Ozone Park. Authorities seized boxes of business records, and the strike force attorney heading the probe stated that these raids had targeted the largest pornographic motion picture operation in the nation. He said that color films produced by this operation were being shipped throughout the country to different distribution centers. The 8mm silent movies, which cost about $1 a piece to process, were shipped by air to Chicago, Atlanta, Pittsburgh, Los Angeles, Charlotte, North Carolina, and Montreal, he reported. Retailers would sell each 200-foot reel with 8 to 10 minutes screening time for $25 to $100. The investigators garnered evidence that Zaffarano's companies also exported these smut films out internationally to such countries as Japan as well. The Queens plant was operated in the name of Gage Enterprises, according to authorities. An affidavit in support of these search warrants for suspicion of interstate transportation of obscene material said that Principal Robert Gage was a film technician and a close associate of Zaffarano. The warrants were issued by federal judge Leo F. Rayfield. The affidavit said that the seized films and still photographs depicted natural and unnatural sexual acts, including fellatio, cunnilingus, sodomy, buggery, and bestiality. FBI agents discovered that a telephone listed to Michael Zaffarano was situated in the basement at the Ozone Park address. This operation supplied both independent pornographers as well as Mafia-connected hoods. As an example, federal agents tied many purchases of film over several years to Cosmo Gus Caggiano, who, according to the FBI, was a reputed associate of the Colombo family. Caggiano had opened his own laboratory on Staten Island back in 1968 to mass-produce hardcore pornographic films. By the mid-1970s, Mickey Zaffarano was bringing in untold wealth for both himself and his Mafia brothers and benefactors. His old friend and direct superior, Carmine Galante, who had been released from the federal penitentiary lockup at Lewisburg, Pennsylvania in 1974, loved Zaffarano. Every time Mickey saw Lilo, he'd hand him a fat envelope of cash. It quickly made the porn king also the fair-haired boy in the boss's eyes. They were so close and seemingly simpatico that when the FBI later closed in on Galante in 1978 to violate his parole on technical violations of associating with known criminals, one of those known criminals they listed was mob figure Michael Zaffarano. As the mob's involvement in the pornography industry continued to mushroom and skyrocket, and the mob's resultant profits soared to levels few other racket operations could match, the FBI decided to launch another deep-cover investigation. This became the largest undercover operation in its history. Known as MyPorn, Miami Pornography. In 1977, 2 FBI agents posing as porno merchants set up shop in Miami, Florida, as distributors of adult entertainment. What was initially targeted as a 6-month probe with a $25,000 budget developed into a dangerous 2.5-year probe of the underworld's obscenity racket costing taxpayers over $500,000. They operated out of a warehouse called Gold Coast Distributors near Miami Airport. The investigation ended in late January of 1980. Several weeks later, on February 14th, multiple search and arrest warrants had been drawn up, and 400 FBI agents quickly fanned out across 16 U.S. cities to arrest 53 defendants, including Zaffarano and DiBernardo. By the time all the dust had settled, 45 defendants had been convicted in the MyPorn case, and most went to prison. But one of the FBI's primary targets of the case, Michael Zaffarano, was never convicted or jailed. That's because during the course of those military-like, lightning-fast FBI raids that fateful day back in February, as the agents stormed the Pussycat Theater in search of their target, Zaffarano attempted to thwart his arrest by evading arresting officers. He quickly slipped through a secret paneled wall and was running for his freedom down the secret corridor of an underground tunnel to another exit under the street when he was felled by a massive heart attack. By the time the agents found him, he was gone. Mickey had dropped dead of a faulty ticker. Zaffarano had had a previous history of heart trouble. It was a tough way to beat a criminal case for sure, maybe the toughest. Michael Mickey Z. Zaffarano died at the young age of only 57 years old. His pornography empire would be taken over by his son John for a short while, but soon fell apart without Mickey at the helm. Other crews quickly ate up his end of that racket market, and that was that, as they say. His blood family, his wife Rosalie and son, shuttered the businesses and sold off all his Times Square holdings to real estate developers in 1985 as part of the city's Times Square redevelopment project. His vast real estate and properties brought $18,500,000. It's not an exaggeration to say that future generations of his family won't ever have to work a day in their lives. As an interesting aside, back in 1979, Zaffarano had been sued in federal court by lawyers for the Dallas Cowboys football cheerleaders because his movie theater had premiered Debbie Does Dallas, a notorious pornographic movie. The cheerleaders alleged he was infringing on copyright by showing it. Eventually, the lawsuit was settled out of court by cutting some of the scenes. The very week before Zaffarano died, he was sued again, this time over Fantasy Island, another porn movie. At the time, it was also a popular ABC weekly program series, and the producers sued because they did not want their title or show associated with the porn movie or the two midgets who promoted it nightly outside the Pussycat and another porn palace named the Lido East, which operated on the east side of Manhattan. Postscript. After the buildings were sold, Zaffarano's son John was forced to pay Genovese capo Matty Ianniello $1 million for the loss of a peep show business he formerly operated from one of Zaffarano's sold buildings. Vinny Asaro also shook the kid down, his own cousin no less, for an additional $400,000 by putting the fear of God in the kid. It was under the guise of being the mediator between the Zaffarano family and Matty the horse. This is just another mob tale. Thank you for listening. Be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next episode. And don't forget to like and comment and let us know what you think of Mob Fireside Chat. You can also visit thenewyorkmafia.com to read many more mob tales. Until next time.
We're going to dance. We're going to dance. We're going to dance and have some fun.